Let's go!
Right, this I think is a surprising video to make, but nowhere near as weird as the title or thumbnail might unavoidably make it seem, because what the Oedipus complex is versus what this man Freud and what the media popularly believes are two different things. It's likely you have heard of the Oedipus complex in some vague form. Big father of psychology Sigmund Freud came up with it, and I suppose, yeah, he did kind of argue that every son wants to murder their father and sleep with their mother, and the reverse for girls. It's a thing. Freud was a pioneer who came up with the basis for a lot of important theories, but he also kind of threw stuff at the wall to see what stuck. He said a lot of wild things, and he had a very strange habit for making absolutely everything about sex. Everything. I think it's probably something to do with his repressed time period, but I am a children's therapist and I'd like to talk about Coraline again, alongside all these other psychological interpretations I've made of this film. This time it's going to be about the Oedipus complex and how it's not always to do with sex. So I won't be discussing that, but I will be talking about rivalry, feeling valued, aggression, competition, and I think most important of all, finding your space in the world. I think we see a lot of this in Coraline, and I think there is a lot to say, so let's do that. Let's say it. Coraline is a girl who feels bored and ignored by her parents due to the stress of their very urgent deadline in work, plus moving house, plus her mum having a car accident.
Let me work.
It leaves Coraline feeling a little forgotten and abandoned in ways that I've talked about in my past videos, but if you break it down to its basic structure, for Coraline there are three parts to this problem. There's her, she's Coraline, she's yeah, she's there. Then there's what she wants, which is affection from her parents, care, love, attention. Only there's also something getting in the way of that, something stopping them, this mysterious other, which is work. And in a child's brain, the solution to all of this could be quite simple. It's just get rid of work, sabotage it, destroy it, interrupt it so your parents remember that you're more important, right? If I can stop them thinking about work, they'll have to think about me again, and to an extent, this is what we see happening in the beginning of the film. We do see her keep interrupting their work, despite how it clearly starts to annoy them. There's even one moment where she fuses the house, causing her dad's computer to crash. Not that she knew that would happen or intended it, but her reaction certainly doesn't show much guilt or concern. I really like this reaction. To a slim extent we can argue that, but the point is there's this tension, this three-way dilemma that so many romance novels then expanded into the most annoying, over-the-top trope in the world. There's me, the object of care, and the other that gets in the way. And I think this much Freud was kind of right about. The infant lying in a cot or a crib or wherever, hopefully somewhere safe, has this caregiver. Could be more than one person, they're not exactly seeing distinct human beings yet, but this person that comes and feeds them, makes them warm, gives them touch and comfort and smiles and talks in a soothing voice. Only this person also seems to go away and leave you there. Where do they go? Why do they go when you need them? You have to cry to get them to come back a lot of the time. That's very odd. Well, I won't touch on it here, but in my last video I mentioned how this gives rise to splitting and seeing an all good, all bad version of this caregiver. But there's also another idea we can discuss today that may start to properly develop a little later in a child's life. Freud spoke about this largely between the ages of 3 and 6, but it's certainly not fixed to that. It's this idea, is my caregiver going away, leaving me alone because something or someone else is drawing them away? Something or someone else they might prefer? Is this someone competing with me for their attention? And this other thing could be going to work for the day. Or it could be you've been dropped off at school and there's that subconscious fear that your caregiver's happy about that, relieved to now spend the day with somebody else. It's a surprisingly common thing in therapy sessions that I'll be seeing a kid and they'll be really wanting to know if I have a child of my own. Because there often is this kind of fear that after the session's gone and I don't have to see them, I go home and I'm relieved to not be seeing them and I forget about them and they're replaced with this other imagined child that I much prefer. It's a very common fear the kids have. They do raise that question question a lot, and it's something you have to kind of explore with them then. In Freud's example though, this was Dad, this other. Mum keeps getting distracted from me to focus on Dad. Keep having these confusing talks about taxes and things I can't understand. Are they deliberately talking about things I can't understand so that I can't be involved in the conversations? Why do they have their own bedroom together where I'm in a completely different room? Is that because they want to pretend I'm not here? It's difficult to understand the rationale. The fear is, of course, that you're not wanted. That's not a belief you're keen to settle on though, so you find a target who's causing all of this. It's Dad's doing, he's a threat to my ego and my sense of security, and it makes me angry and jealous, and I need to do something about Dad. Not that Dad's done anything wrong here, this is Freud's example. He's probably just caring for the kid as much. It's more just he's a symbol in this, an object for that projection, a reason to explain why you aren't getting this caregiver's 100% attention all of the time. But I don't think we should think about this just in terms of parents, because it could be a sibling. Sibling rivalry is a very, very common scenario, and this plays into it massively. Perhaps a weird example, but I can't help thinking of my dad's pet dogs recently. There's one of them, the very second you start petting her brother, Bob, she will squeak and let out this half kind of whine and jump up to try and get in the way, like they're in competition, like she can't bear that he's getting attention. Maybe if you give Bob attention instead of me, I'm going to be forgotten altogether. Maybe you'll start to prefer Bob. I don't know if the psychology works the same for dogs, but it's a simple example. But it could be that, it could be a load of other examples with different setups. I kind of wonder if there's any research done on phones being seen as an object of rivalry. I remember a first session I once did with a child where he really wanted his mum to come in with him, and when she started messaging on her phone in the middle of the session, he pulled it out of her hands and threw it on the floor, which is a really powerful expression at the time. I've only very tenuously tied this to Coraline so far though. I've just been trying to do this one step at a time, but there's a step further to go. Well, 2 steps. I hope it helps breaking this down into steps, because I've always considered that a brilliant way to learn. This video is sponsored by Brilliant, who are big on learning via active engagement with thousands of interactive lessons broken down into clear, digestible steps. If you want lessons in maths, programming, data analysis, probability, all those more scientific endeavours, then Brilliant is a great app that's far simpler than just like searching online for videos and things to read, and also far more memorable because it's engaging you. It's like good teachers are supposed to do when they're not horrendously overworked. Don't just explain or show or even simply test your memory, but get you actively thinking in the right ways to analyse or solve problems on your own. I mentioned before I've been on a gradual quest with Brilliant by learning about probability and mathematics in the eventual aim to understand what the hell quantum physics is. I think probably actually because of the film Oppenheimer. I think that made me curious. But Brilliant is designed for learning a little bit every day, and it's going well for me so far. That's my update. And I like promoting things that have a free version so you can make up your own minds in your own time. But even better, here's a link to give you 30 days free access to their premium version. And if you do try that out and decide you love it, then there's also 20% off an annual subscription. So click the link in the description or the pinned comments and see what you think for yourselves. Brilliant. So, yes, this movie's villain is the Beldam, who appears to Coraline as her other mother with an other father, and it is the perfect disguise to trick a girl feeling ignored by her real parents. Here she gets a fantasy to imagine what if her parents always listened to her and gave her everything she wanted, and it's wonderful. At first. But if we were to continue interpreting this movie from an Oedipal point of view, I think something interesting happens. Coraline starts seeing the other parents as her true parents, let's say. The ones who do offer her care, who listen to her, who mean that to her, represent that object of nurture with all of their food and attentive, playful encouragement. Of course it's not real care, but to Coraline it seems that way. Coraline loves spending time with them, and suddenly then the real world is seen twice as bad. Her parents are seen as awful. You know, to begin with, she was understandably unhappy with her parents, but also kind of accepting of their stress. Or when she was negative, there was something kind of playful to it.
Think they're trying to poison me?
But now she is very, very angry with everything they do. They're not seen as an object of care. The other parents are seen as that, and her real parents are now seen as a threat to that. The thing to stop her from enjoying the other world. But if they weren't there, then I could spend all the time I liked with my other mother. And so Coraline kind of relishes this chance to escape them, and a kind of a chance for revenge, I think, a chance to abandon her parents. How does this fit in the framework I've already laid out? Okay, in truth, this interpretation doesn't line up perfectly right now, because it means Coraline has completely switched which parents she's viewing which ways. This is where the term splitting might come in handy that I discussed in the last video, but never mind that today. And also, this isn't like the second set of parents vying for the other set's attention, the way your brother or sister vies for your mum's attention. This is instead two sets of parents who aren't really interacting with each other at all. It doesn't line up perfectly, no, but A, there are other things to say later on, and B, I quite like that, because it's a bit like the child's fantasy about rivalry here. Coraline's kind of been competing to get her parents' attention, and it's not been working, and now there's this fantasy which has flipped it all around. Now Coraline isn't competing for anything, there's nothing she has to vie with for her parents' attention because she's the one in charge. They'll have to fight for my attention now because I've got these other parents instead. I get to weigh up both sides, I get to choose which one I like best. Does that make sense? It feels very much like a child's fantasy. And it kind of reminds me, this is a slightly different example, but it reminds me when I was a kid and I'd sometimes imagine dying and imagine my own funeral, trying to picture whether or not my parents would cry or care. I think there is that kind of angle to the story here. If Coraline does get a choice, then the problem is she chooses the other world, a decision that is made less with a level head than with an impulsive, frustrated aggression to get back at her parents. She gets very, very angry about the gloves that her mum won't buy her, and then when her mum goes away to go shopping, Coraline is eager to kind of leave home.
Won't be long. But I might be.
And I think the comment, "but I might be," suggests she's kind of excited about the idea of her parents getting home before she does, worrying where she is, enjoying their fear there. Anyway, she makes this decision to go to the other world, and then she gets stuck there, and then her parents are made prisoners, and it's one of those twisted, be careful what you wish for kind of moments. Because she wanted her parents to leave, right? And she kind of wanted them to need her as well. Now they definitely do. What am I getting at in all of this? I've been kind of waffling a little bit. Well, there's a term called magical thinking. It basically means the idea that your thoughts can be magically responsible for events that take place. For example, if a kid shouted at their brother, "I wish you'd go away and die," and then say a week later that brother happens to be struck by lightning or something, the first kid had no involvement in that death. Logically, we can understand that, but the kid said it, thought it, partly wished it on some level. And so that kid may, on a less logical level, feel like they are responsible, feel like their thinking magically caused this to happen, leaving them then with a lot of guilt. It's a very extreme example there, but it's quite ordinary for children to reason in this kind of way. You know, one of my old tutors used to talk about the Lion King. Simba sings about how he just can't wait to be king, then Mufasa is crushed in a stampede, and it's that kind of moment. Simba then runs away to hide in guilt and shame. Coraline wished for new parents. I don't think she says it, I don't think she even may consciously think it. Although we do see her making comparisons between the two versions. Subconsciously, I think she definitely had that fantasy. And then it came true. Her real parents were replaced, and it's absolutely horrifying. And luckily they weren't gone for good, because Coraline was able to go back and save them, and to recognise not to really blame herself. It was the Beldam's manipulation and trickery that did all of this. Freud speculated that the Oedipal rivalry was an ordinary stage of development, to just be desperately, frustratingly wanting all of that care and attention, and then out comes all of this aggressive sides towards anyone who seems to get in the way of it, that you want them gone. Not actually dead, even when kids might say that, you know, because death isn't really a concept they fully understand. In that earlier example I gave about the brother saying, "I wish you would die," they won't really mean that. It's just an insult designed to hurt, and it sort of just means not there. You want them not there, and rarely for good either. Because again, children struggle with the finality of death. There's this kind of idea that they'll just sort of wake up from it at some point. So they don't really mean gone. These are just fantasies and aggression to not take too seriously in that level. And hopefully if you have space to express some of that stuff and have it listened to and have empathy and your caregivers help you manage the aggression to reassure you as well that you are secure and loved, hopefully you move forwards. But if in some tragic circumstance there is a death or somebody does go completely, it becomes a lot harder to develop out of this stage because the guilt leaves you more stuck. If it happens to come true, magical thinking again does make you feel responsible. Simba was terrified of replacing his father in case it meant feeding into that desire to be king again, that secret wish, the recognition he can only be king with his father dead. Luckily, though, Coraline doesn't have to face that trauma. I mean, the events of this film are already more than enough trauma if you take them literally, but she is able to save her parents, and she has her fantasies and she expresses her aggression, and she probably does feel some hate towards her parents, and to their work, and to how important that is to them. But she also realises she feels love too, not just hate, and that it's okay to feel that, and that this is all part of a big whirlwind of emotion that is every social interaction ever. Coraline, I suppose you could say, gets the fantasy both ways. She enjoys the fantasy of getting rid of her parents, but also the good fantasy of getting to realise that's wrong and getting to reverse it by heroically saving them and showing her love as a result. All of these conflicting emotions, all of these experiences to do with rivalry in some way, ideally become experiences you can manage healthily, and hopefully rather than a threat, rivalry becomes something motivating. If we go back to the very Freudian example, it changes from I need to kill and replace dad in order to be with mum into a more mature kind of I can become someone like my dad, as good as him, hell maybe even better once I start spotting his flaws. I can become that in order to be with someone like my mum. You know, a relationship with someone where there is love and acceptance and care that somewhat taps into feelings and experiences that you ideally had as a child. It's that, and it's also hopefully learning that it's okay to be your own person too. Because sometimes rivalry can be a healthy motivation, yes, and that we should not just be thinking about this in terms of parents. I think of like well-functioning football teams where there's players who might not get to play every single game, but they still feel they belong, they still feel they're contributing to the team, and they are motivated to learn from whatever rival player it is that's taking their position in the team. That can be a positive. Or alternatively, rivalry can be really unhealthy, and it can then take a lot of personal strength to go, no, I'm not going to get drawn into some endless, stressful competition for a promotion that my boss is only dangling over to make me work harder. I am worth more than just seeking his approval. That's also an experience with rivalry where you're having to manage boundaries. All very interesting, but it doesn't line up entirely for Coraline, does it? No. That's because this video wasn't actually meant to be about her. It was meant to be about the Beldam. The Beldam desires Coraline, and so invents this whole world and disguises herself as another mother in order to try and impress her. Why does she want her so bad?
She wants something to love, I think. Something that isn't her. Or maybe she just loves something to eat.
The story is vague there, as it absolutely should be, and there is a sense she does need to literally consume to survive. However, when the Beldam screams, "Don't leave me, I'll die without you," as Coraline flees, I believe there's an emotional component to that too. I quite like the idea that the talk about consumption isn't just literal, the confusion between loving and eating, caring and possessing, which obviously lines up perfectly with the theme of Coraline trying to understand those differences for herself. The Beldam wants all of the objects she desires, to obtain them entirely, and when there's something in the way of that, something preventing it, she treats that as a rival to remove. Okay, at first she is happy for Coraline's parents to exist, because that's how she gets close to Coraline. I will be her other mother, I will appear as a much better parent than them. And it works. Coraline is increasingly fed up with her real parents, and that makes the Beldam appear a better alternative. The Beldam is winning that imagined rivalry until the moment she wants Coraline to surrender her eyes. eyes. Then she starts to question things and to miss her parents. Suddenly the Beldam isn't winning this rivalry, the parents are, and so now she can't stand them, has to remove them. The Beldam makes them her prisoners, hoping Coraline will just forget about her real parents and come back to her.
Perhaps they've grown bored of you and run away to France.
Because it's as simple as that, obviously. That's the fantasy. If they were just gone, things would carry on as though they never existed in the first place, as though it was all just me. Except, of course, that's not how it works, because that's the childish fantasy, and hopefully the developing child can adjust to the reality, and learn to accept there are times without your caregiver's attention, or where someone else has it, without that meaning you are forgotten or lost. Takes a lot of reassurance to get... Takes a lot of reassurance to get there, and if we were Freud, he would be making a very Oedipal interpretation of the Beldam. But like, this is only one interpretation of the movie, and out of all of the videos I've made, I think this is actually my least favourite interpretation, even if it's still interesting and worth discussing. And I think it does tie into a lot of what I've discussed in other videos, but I don't think there's too much to just this interpretation on its own. The world has moved on from Freud and the Oedipus complex. Sleeping with or murdering parents, gouging out your eyes in guilt, which I've refrained from linking to the button eyes here. Genital envy, that was another part of his theory. However, was there a kernel of truth at the centre of it? This early experience of rivalry or imagined rivalry, the fantasies and guilt about getting rid of the competition, and a development through that struggle. Yeah, that's my conclusion. So comment your thoughts, like this video if you liked it, subscribe, and maybe even support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee. I think this is the last Coraline video I'm going to make. I think you can tell I've run out now. Maybe I'll prove myself wrong, but maybe not. So otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Flying Spider, Grace, Kellyanne Davidson, Luke Orr, Michael Gallagher, Chad Bramwell, and Joshua C. Follier. Thank you.